The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over city and harbor on silent haunches, and then moves on. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over city and harbor on silent haunches, and then moves on.
And so, my name is Carl Sandburg. And I was born in Galesburg, Illinois in 1878, a long time ago. But before we get to all that, I am glad you are here. And I hope you get what you want. Do you want affidavits? There's a hole in the bottom of the sea. Do you want affidavits? There is a man in the moon with money for you. Do you want affidavits? There are 10 dancing girls in a sea chamber off Nantucket, waiting for you. There are tall candles in Timbuktu, burning penance for you. Is there anything else? Speak now, for we stand amid the great wishing windows. And the law says that we are free to be wishing all night long at these windows. And so, shall I raise my right hand and swear to you in the monotone of a notary republic? This is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Well, with these windows wide open, let's begin. When I was coming up, I had two ambitions, to be a poet and to be an orator. And I had written a lecture on Walt Whitman titled, The Poet of Democracy. And that lecture allowed me to travel anywhere in America I wanted to go. And I wanted to go everywhere. You see, these were the days before the advent of radio, when many town parks and city squares would have a platform erected in their center. And if you could hold an audience, you could stay up there as long as you liked. I loved being on those platforms, reading, reciting my poems, sharing about the life and the works of Walt Whitman, America's greatest poet, teaching about democracy, its value, its fragility. And then when I was finished with all of that, I would grab my guitar and I would sing and play American folk songs that I was constantly discovering. I loved it all, the people, the experiences, the travel, for I believed in what Emerson had said, that expression is half the man. And when I read that, I realized I was batting 500 nearly right out of the gate. And in those early days, I did have the man or the woman who would come up and they would say to me, "Now, I don't get your poetry, Mr. Sandburg, but my son enjoys it, and I'm beginning to wonder if I'm old-fashioned." Or, "Now, I've tried to read your poetry, Mr. Sandburg, and it doesn't mean anything to me. But my daughter has studied you in college, and she has all your books, and she's trying to tell me what they're about." And so, what I decided to do was in the preface of my 5th book, titled Good Morning America, published 1928, in the preface, before all those poems, I decided that I would try to define poetry, because definitions are important, and because it's poetry. And what I came up with were 38 one-sentence definitions. Poetry is the projection across silence of cadences arranged to break that silence with definite intentions of echoes, syllables, and wavelengths. Poetry seems like a modern contraption here. Poetry is a sky dark with a wild duck migration. Poetry is a puppet show where riders of skyrockets and divers of sea fathoms, they gossip about the 6th sense and the 4th dimension. My complete book of poems, published 1950, Pulitzer. Herein are 7 books all fastened into one, over 800 attempts, and each one written between the years 1910 and 1950. And in those 40 years, the world saw World War I, the gay post-war prosperity years, the Great Depression, World War II, peace in the Cold War. It was global drama on a colossal scale. And my goal from the very beginning was to create art that spoke to the heart of humanity. And indeed, the critic and the poet, Harriet Monroe, she described it as speech torn from the heart. My first book was titled Chicago Poems, published 1916. And the city of Chicago, my city, was the subject of all those early poems. Well, this began the book, and it set my career on its way. Chicago. Hog butcher for the world. Tool maker. Stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and the nation's freight handler. Stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders. They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them, for I've seen your painted women under the gas lamps luring the farm boys. And they tell me, you are crooked. And I say, yes, that's true, for I've seen the gunman kill and go free to kill again. And they tell me, you are brutal. And my reply is, on the faces of women and children, I have seen the marks of wanton hunger. And having answered so, I turn again to those who would sneer at this, my city, and I give them back the sneer. And I say to them, come, show me another city with head lifted, singing so proud to be alive and coarse and strong and cunning, flinging magnetic curses amid the toil of piling job upon job. Here is a tall, bold slugger, set vivid against the soft little cities. Eager as a dog with a tongue lapping for action, and cunning as a savage pitted against the wilderness. Bareheaded, shoveling, wrecking, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. Under the smoke, with dust all over his mouth, and laughing with white teeth. Under the terrible burden of destiny, laughing even as a young man laughs, laughing even as a fighter laughs that has never lost a battle, bragging and laughing that under his wrist is the pulse, and under his ribs, the heart of the people. And it's laughing, laughing the stormy, husky, brawling laughter of youth. Half naked and sweating, proud to hog butcher, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and the freight handler to the nation. Poetry is the plan for a slit in the face of a bronze fountain goat and the pathway for fresh drinking water. Poetry is a fossil, a rock print of a fin and a wing with an illegible oath between. Now, not long after I arrived in Chicago, well, it seems I'm to tell you of my second book of poems, titled Cornhuskers, published 1918. And the prairie was the subject of all those poems. And this book was not initially well received. The New York Reviewer described it as melancholy. Oh. But Ben Hecht of the Chicago Daily News, he did his own review. And in full disclosure, the Daily News was my paper. They were my employer, and Ben Hecht was my friend. Still, I will never forget the day I opened the paper and I read this. He's our Chicago bard, minstrel of our alleys, troubadour of the wheat patches outside our town, homer of our sunsets and our stockyards. There's more smoke to his song and kick to his heartbeat than Whitman ever coaxed out of his mellow, windbaggy soul. A man in love with life is Sandburg, looking at the world through his heart. The people's poet is Sandburg, poet for the great and the egg-headed public who laugh at him. To all of them, he makes love. He tells them their secrets on a banjo. There's a snarl and a whine to him, and he sometimes writes with his fists. Out of the slang of his street, out of the brotherhood hokums and the turkey and the straw aesthetic of his day, Sandburg is making the new poetry. He doesn't belong to any of the art movements. He's a movement all himself. He's the only genuine jazz motif in the letters of the day. A motif sonorous and quick, brazen and elusive. The ache of crude passions, the snort of crude laughters, the caress of strong hands. These make love to you out of the poetry of Carl Sandburg. Ben Hecht, the power of an encouraging word. And that book would go on to win the prize that the following year would be renamed as Pulitzer. New York reviewers. Bah! In all my travels, I collected so many memories, but the deepest and the far most lovely were of my wife and 3 daughters. With my family, I had bushels and bushels of extraordinary memories. Memories you can flick me and sting me, memories you can hold me even and smooth. One memory that held me so for 59 years was named Lillian Steichen. Now, Jesus wept. Voltaire smiled. William Morris worked. But Sandburg Steichen, we flung the world 20,000 beautiful, vibrating, fleeting, indomitable, and happy lovebirds, and all singing love songs and swelling the world's joy, even so. Now, we had many pet names that we called one another, but the name that I settled upon for her was Paula. Love to you, Paula. Heart. Love and kisses on your lips and eyes. Lillian. And I made sure I never forgot the occasion for the celebration of her birth. Not every day in Aurora Borealis for your birthday. It is because I love you, I give you a birthday present. The Aurora Borealis. It was a long trip carrying the Aurora Borealis to you. Slippery is the Aurora Borealis. You think you have a hold of it, but it is sliding off your hands and your shoulders, and you have to stop and get a better hold of it. Many times it came near getting away from me, but I struggled with it, and I kept on struggling until I laid on your doorstep, on your front porch, stretching high into the sky, that fine, tall stack of shimmering and swimmering lights, that good old reliable Aurora Borealis. And if you would like another Aurora Borealis, you tell me, and I will go where the Aurora Borealises grow. And I will struggle and keep on struggling until I lay on your doorstep, on your front porch, one more Aurora Borealis to show I love you. And if you write to me and say you would like a big rainbow, fresh off the sky, then I will struggle and keep on struggling until you see it right there on your doorstep, on your front porch. You can see that I'm a struggler, ready any day to struggle on, to show I love you. And all that love produced 3 glorious daughters, Margaret, Janet, and Helga. Harsk Harsk 1. Harsk Harsk, the wind blows tonight. What a night for a baby to come into the world. What a night for a melodrama baby to come. With its father wondering and its mother wondering what the years will bring on their little stork feet, until a year when this very baby might be saying on some storm night with a melodrama baby being born, what a night for a baby to come into the world. Harsk Harsk, the wind blows tonight. Two, knit, stitch, hemstitch. It is 5 months off. Sheets and bags and towels, these are the offerings. When he is older or she is a big girl, there may be flowers, ribbons, and money for birthday offerings. Now, however, we must remember it is a naked stranger coming to us and having a sheath so soft that we must be ready and soft too. Knit, stitch, hemstitch. It is 5 months off. 3. It would be easy to pick a lucky star for this baby if a choice of 2 stars lay before our eyes. One, a pearl gold star, and one, pearl silver, with the offer of a chance to pick a lucky star. 4, when the high hour comes, let there be a light flurry of snow. White spots zigzag against the gray rooftops. The snowborn, they all understand this as a luck wish. With my family, I had bushels and bushels of extraordinary memories. But life, as it is, has the other side of it too. Memories, you can flick me and sting me. One memory that gave our family a tremendous flick and years of painful stings had to do with our firstborn, Margaret. Now, Margaret was a glorious girl. She loved life. She loved learning. She was the star pupil in the new Montessori School of Instruction. But at about the age of 9, it became very apparent that something was terribly wrong. She began to have seizures, violent convulsions, where she'd fall to the floor, instantly unconscious, and writhe about wildly, gnashing her teeth, with her eyes rolled up in the back of her head and foam coming out of the sides of her mouth and her nostrils. And this went on for 2 or 3 brutal minutes, with her mother and her father completely helpless. And then she would slowly come back to us, drenched in sweat, exhausted, frightened, and having terrible headaches the rest of the day. And maybe this wouldn't return for 3 weeks. And maybe it would be back the next day. And maybe some days were absolutely awful. At one time, she lost 15 pounds in 2 weeks. And it was what later would be diagnosed as epilepsy. Dear Margaret, dear Margaret, this is just a little letter from your daddy to say he thinks about you hours and hours. And he knows there was never a princess or a fairy worth so much love. We are going on a long journey and a difficult fight. You, Mother, and Daddy. And we are going to go on slowly, quietly, hand in hand, the three of us, never giving up. And so we're going to win. Slowly, quietly, hand in hand, we're going to win. Love, Daddy. Well, right then and there, I decided that I was only going to live in the present with the girls. We knew the worst could come on any day. But if it didn't come, what we got was so much velvet. Every beautiful thing I know is ephemeral. With Janet and Margaret, I am ready for anything all of the time. Every day I come home and I find them alive, I take as a day snatched from death. And I think, too, of how they die every week. The little puff of Janet we had a year ago, she's dead and gone. The young Margaret learning to talk 3 years ago, she's dead. And she's replaced by an endless chatterer. Every beautiful thing I know is ephemeral, a thing of a moment. Life is a series of things that vanish. I lost 2 brothers to diphtheria, and we had a double funeral on a bitter winter day when I was a child. I buried a child who had not lived long enough to be named. We're such little things. And so I reckon the girls, well, they're on alone, and only on alone. They come out of nowhere, and they'll go back to nowhere. Babbling, wild flying. They die every day like a flower shedding petals. And then they come on again. Poetry is a series of explanations of life that fade off into horizons too swift for explanations. Poetry is an echo seeking a shadow dancer to be a partner. Well, it turned out that Margaret did win, and we all did win. Medication breakthroughs saved her life, and just in time. She lived to be all of 85 years old and was always a glorious girl, daughter, woman. Margaret Mary Steichen Sandburg. Well, it was about the same time, actually before Margaret got so sick, that I was on the road and writing the Rootabaga Stories, published 1922, and Rootabaga Pigeons, 1923. And I wrote these for my girls who were often far from me, and I wanted them to have some type of new American literature, fairy tale equivalent to elves and gnomes. And what I came up with were nonsense stories with a lot of American fooling in them. Stories such as how Gimme the Axe, he found out about the zigzag railroad and who made it zigzag. Or the story of Blixie Bimber and the power of the gold buckskin whincher. Or Slipfoot and how he nearly always never gets what he goes after. Or Pig Wisps. Now, these stories were very successful for decades and decades. And my friend, the architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, he said he liked to read them just before bedtime. Oh. He said they fill the long-felt want. Poetry. And later, after Rootabaga Pigeons came out, he wrote me and said, now all those children born in the Midwest for the next 100 years, they're all peeping at you right now, Carl, through little pink fingers, knowing that in these beauties they have found great friends. I was a writer my entire life, and there was never a period of time when I was more alive and open and free to use all my full and free imagination as when I wrote these books, these stories. And sometimes I believe that as time moves on and all my work fades out, there may be 2 or 3 Rootabaga stories still standing. You know, it's been 55 years since I've read a story, and I would like to read a story tonight. May I read you a Rootabaga story? Fantastic. I'll read one that was always a favorite of the girls and of mine as well, called Pig Wisps. There was an oyster king in the South who knew how to open oysters and pick out the pearls. He grew rich, and all kinds of money came rolling in on him because he was a great oyster picker and knew how to pick out the pearls. The son of this oyster king was named Shovel-Ears, and it was hard for him to remember. He knows how to open oysters, but he forgets to pick out the pearls, said the father of Shovel-Ears. He is learning to remember worse and worse and to forget better and better, said the father of Shovel-Ears. Now in that same place, far in the south, was a little girl with 2 braids of hair twisted down her back and a face saying, "Here we come. Where from?" And her mother called her Pig Wisps. Twice a week, Pig Wisp ran to the butcher shop for a soup bone. Before starting, she crossed her fingers, and then the whole way to the butcher shop kept her fingers crossed. If she met any playmates and they asked her to stop and play cross tag or jackstones or all around the mulberry bush or the green grass grew all around or drop the handkerchief, she told them, "My fingers are crossed and I'm running to the butcher shop for a soup bone." Well, one morning, running to the butcher shop, she bumped into a big, odd boy and bumped him flat on the sidewalk. "Don't you look where you were running?" she asked him. "I forgot again," said Shovel-Ears. "I remember worse and worse. I forget better and better." "Cross your fingers like this," said Pig Wisps, showing him how. He ran to the butcher shop with her, watching her keep her fingers crossed till the butcher gave her the soup bone. "After I get it, then the soup bone reminds me to go home with it," she told him. "But until I get the soup bone, I keep my fingers crossed." Shovel-Ears went to his father and began helping his father open oysters. And Shovel-Ears kept his fingers crossed to remind him to pick out the pearls. Well, he picked 100 buckets of pearls the first day and brought his father the longest, slippery, shining rope of pearls ever seen in the oyster country. "How do you do it?" his father asked. "It is the crossed fingers like this," said Chevaliers, crossing his fingers like the letter X. "This is the way to remember better and forget worse." It was then the Oyster King went and he told the men who changed the alphabets just what happened. And when the men who changed the alphabets heard just what had happened, they decided to put in a new letter, the letter X, near the end of the alphabet, the sign of the crossed fingers. And on the wedding day of Pig Wisps and Chevaliers, the men who changed the alphabets all came to the wedding with their fingers crossed. Pig Wisps and Chevaliers stood up to be married. They crossed their fingers. They told each other they would remember their promises. And Pig Wisps had 2 ropes of pearls twisted down her back, and a sweet young face saying, "Here we come. Where from?" That's the long-felt want. Poetry. Children need good books for their free imaginations. And children grow up so fast. Everyone knows how fast they grow. And children, too, are often like the spring wind. Spring wind. Be flip with us if you want to, spring wind. Be joyful and make us sniff at your slow secrets. Be easy with us, spring wind. Be lovely, and yet be lovely not too fast with us. If a child came crying out of a snowstorm and sat down sharing secrets of new playthings, crying because lovelier things than ever came that year. If a child came crying out of sheet ice, a white carving of a lithe running torso, and holding in his hands new and baffling playthings, wet and smiling. If a child came crying so wet and smiling, smelling of promises, of yellow roses across the river backwashes, of potato blossoms across the prairie flatlands, and having even so much as just one new honest song to sing, well, we would say, "Come, sit on our back porch. Listen with us and tell us more. Tell us all you know. Tell us the secrets of the spring wind. Tell us if it will be a lucky year. Be lovely, and yet be lovely not too fast with us." I am getting that feeling I used to have up on the platforms now and then, that maybe I might be talking just a little bit too much. It happens. And it was always a good time to change the gearing with some music and that guitar. A young friend weighing less than a newborn infant, and ever responsive at all sincere attempts at mutual respect, depth of devotion, or love gone right off the deep end. Actually, this would be an excellent time to tell you of the American Songbag. Published 1927. An American folk song hymnal, words and music. Herein are 260 American folk songs. Colonial, pioneer, railroad, hobo, work gang, gossamers, chants, and ditties. And I did not write these songs, of course, but they were songs like Midnight Rider, C.C. Rider, Barbara Allen, Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, the John B. Sayles, the Sloop, and westerns such as Get Along, Little Dogies, and The Streets of Laredo. And I did not write these songs, but we collected them because at that time they were in danger of being lost forever to history. I know. Let's do a song I never tired of playing and singing. The Red River Valley. By this valley they say you are leaving. I shall miss your bright eyes and sweet smile, for they tell me you're taking the sunshine that's brightened our path for a while. Come and sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten, bid me adieu. Just remember that Red River Valley and the one who has loved you so true. If you know this song, will you sing it with me? Come and sit by my side if you love me. Here we go. Come and sit by my side if you love me. Do not hasten to bid me. Do not hasten to bid me adieu. Just remember the Red River. Just remember that Red River Valley and the one who has loved you so true. That's great. That's great. Thank you. You too. What a song. And that song made it into that book because it, like all of the rest, did not have a copyright. And each of those American folk songs were in danger of being lost forever to America. And my gratification about that book is merely that of a patriot who had seen duty and done it. I know. Let's do Jesse James. No doubt you know the story of Jesse James, but for the uninformed, it should be noted that Jesse was living in St. Joseph, Missouri, under the name of Howard, when he was shot in the back and killed by his supposed young friend, Robert Ford. It was on a Wednesday night, the moon was shining bright. They robbed the Glendale train, and the people there did say, from many miles away, it was robbed by Frank and Jesse James. For old Jesse had a wife who mourned all her life, and the 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard and laid Jesse James in his grave. Now he was standing on a chair, he's just a dusting pictures there, when he thought he'd heard a sound. And when he turned his head around, why, that bullet smacked him down and laid poor Jesse on the floor. And all the people, they held their breath when they learned of Jesse's death, and they wondered how he came to fall. Well, it was Robert Ford, in fact, who had shot him in the back while he hung a picture on the wall. For old Jesse had a wife who mourned all her life, and the 3 children, they were brave. But that dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard and laid Jesse James in his grave. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I always believed that was the quintessential American folk song. And there are other songs in that book. There are Irish, Mexican, Chinese songs, but they're Irish American, Mexican American, Chinese American. My parents themselves were first-generation immigrants from Sweden. All my life, America meant everything to me. Well, I always used to follow Jesse James by saying, I believe it's time for a short intermission. So let's be back in 7 minutes. Let's be back in 7 minutes. I'll see you soon. Tonight, won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight and dance to the light of the moon? Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight and dance to the light of the moon? I danced with a girl with a hole in her stocking. Her knees were knocking, big toe through her stocking. I danced with a girl with a hole in her stocking. We danced by the light of the moon. Yeah, Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Buffalo gals, won't you come out tonight and dance to the light of the moon? What a song. Thank you. And thanks for being back. I appreciate that. And I wanted to tell you of other interesting relationships that I had with other American poets. As I mentioned earlier, I had a very special relationship with Walt Whitman. You might say he was my captain, oh my captain. It was from Walt Whitman that I learned about social idealism. I learned about the value and the fragility of democracy. I learned about the life of the soul. And I learned how to read and write free verse. For America's greatest poet was known as the father of free verse. Now, Robert Frost and I were colleagues, and he was someone with whom I had the utmost respect, and he for me. But Robert Frost was not a fan of free verse. He completely mastered his craft of structure and rhythm and meter and rhyme. The author of The Road Not Taken, you remember, of two roads that diverge in the yellow wood. Just that singular poem itself has made all the difference. And we were always friendly with one another. And as people like that will do, we would tease each other now and then. And once, when he introduced me at a banquet, he looked over at me and smiled and said, "Now, I would rather play tennis with a net all the way down than write free verse." That's perfect. Robert Frost's poems are read by strong men and farmers and thieves and deacons. Now, I never met Emily Dickinson. She died in 1886 at just the age of 55 at her Amherst, Massachusetts home. But she guided and instructed me. It was from her that I learned that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Emily Dickinson pared poetry down to its essence. And once, on a moonlit night, I walked with Robert Frost past her Amherst home. And after going inside and meeting Mrs. Bingham, well, I was a little spellbound at her answers to my questions and at her questions she put to me. And along with American poets, I was more than a little intrigued with one American president, as you can see from these 6 volumes. Abraham Lincoln, The Prairie Years, 1926. And these 4, Abraham Lincoln, The War Years, 1939, a Pulitzer. And the very first thing that I set out to do was try to separate the man from the myth. Because almost immediately after he was assassinated, he became mythicized. Abraham Lincoln, The Prairie Years. Almost there were times when children and dreamers, they would look to Abraham Lincoln and they lazily let their eyelids half shut and they half imagine him to be some type of tall horse, chestnut tree, or a rangy horse, or a big wagon, or a log barn full of new mown hay. There was something else, or more, of a man, a lawyer, a Republican candidate with principles, a prominent citizen. There was something spreading, elusive, and mysterious. He was the strange friend, and he was the friendly stranger. Abraham Lincoln was the mastermind of an awful civil war. There are over 1 million words on record that he wrote or spoke, and nearly all of it would hold good for the present hour. Lincoln understood the balances required in a democracy between freedom and responsibility. He wrote and spoke the word responsibility nearly as often as he wrote and spoke the word freedom. You cannot have one without the other. Lincoln had such a wide array of human personality. He understood everything, it seemed, in the human pageant. He had an exquisite sense of justice. Abraham Lincoln had an exquisite sense of justice. He was practical, and yet he was a dreamer. Poetry is the shuffling of boxes of illusions and buckled with a strap of facts. Poetry is a theorem of a yellow silk handkerchief, knotted in riddles and sealed in a balloon and tied to the tail of a kite flying in a white wind against a blue sky in spring. Well, just as there are boxes and kites, so is there the poet and politics. How the poet relates to societies, to democracies, to monarchies, to dictatorships. And as for me, I began a socialist. And if you believe the subject of socialism is easy and that everyone knows what socialism is, then sit with me and we'll open to the S's in the Britannica, where we'll find that there has been in many varieties of socialists as there are wild birds that fly in the woods. True democracy, it is as difficult and mystic in its operations as true religion or true art. One of my theses, if I even have any, it hovers around the point that the masses of the people, they've gone wrong in the past, and they will again in the future. But in the main, it's their direction that's right. This theme was with me my entire career, from Chicago poems. I am the people, the mob. I am the people, the mob, the crowd, the mass. Do you know that all of the work of the world is done through me? I'm the working man, the inventor, the maker of the world's food and clothes. I am the audience that witnesses history. The Napoleons come from me, as do the Lincolns, and they die, and I send forth more Napoleons and Lincolns. I am the seed ground. I am the prairie that can stand for much plowing. Terrible storms pass over me. I forget. The best of me is sucked out and wasted. I forget. Everything but death comes for me and makes me work and give up all I have. And I forget. Sometimes I growl and shake myself and spatter out a few red drops for history to remember. And then I forget. When I, the people, learn to remember, when I, the people, use the lessons of yesterday to no longer forget who robbed me last week, who played me for a fool. Then there will not be any speaker in all of the world who will say the name, the people, with any fleck of a sneer in their voice or a far-off smile of derision. The mob, the crowd, the mass will arrive then. That published 1916. 20 years later, I wrote the longest book of verse I had ever written. The People, Yes. The People, Yes, number 9. A father sees his son nearing manhood. What shall he say to that son? Life is hard, so be steel, be a rock. And this shall stand him for the storms and serve him in the humdrums and the monotonies and guide him amid sudden betrayals and tighten him amid slack moments. Life is a soft loam, so be gentle and go easy. And this too shall serve him, for many brutes have been gentled where lashes have failed, and the growth of a frail flower in a path up, it has sometimes shattered and split a rock. A tough will counts, and so does desire, and so does a rich, soft wanting. Without rich wanting, nothing arrives. Tell him too much money has killed some men years before burial, and the quest for lucre beyond a few and easy needs has twisted good enough men sometimes into dry and thwarted worms. Tell him time as a stuff, it can be wasted. And tell him to be a fool every now and then. And to have no shame over having been a fool. And yet learning something out of every folly and hoping to repeat none of the cheap follies. And thus arriving at an intimate understanding in a world numbering many fools. Tell him to be alone often and get it himself. And above all else, to tell himself no lies about himself. Whatever little lies he may tell amongst other people, tell him solitude is creative if he's strong. And the final decisions are made in silent rooms. Tell him to be different from other people if it's natural and easy to be being different. And let him have lazy days seeking deeper motives. And let him seek deep where he is a born natural. And then he may understand Shakespeare, the Wright brothers, Pasteur and Pavlov, Michael Faraday, and free imaginations. Bringing changes into a world resenting change. He will be lonely enough for the work he knows as his own. Poetry is a pack sack of invisible keepsakes. Poetry is a mystic and sensuous mathematics of fire, smokestacks, waffles, pansies, people, and purple sunsets. Is there any easy road to freedom? A relentless man loved France long before she came to shame and the eating of bitter dust. Loving her as mother and torch, as bone of his kith and kin. And he spoke passion, saying, rest is not a word of free peoples. Rest is a monarchical word. A relentless Russian loved Russia long before she came to bear agony amid valor and rivers of blood. Loving her as mother and torch, as bone of his kith and kin. And he remembered an old Swedish saying, the fireborn are at home in fire. A Kentucky-born Illinoisan found himself by journey through shadows and prayer, the chief magistrate of the American people. And pleading in words close to low whispers, my fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass shall light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope on earth. 4 little words come worth studying over. We must be disenthralled. But what is a thrall? And who are thralls? Men tied down? Or men doped? Or men drowsy? He had hoped to see them shake themselves loose and so be disenthralled. There are freedom shouters and there are freedom whisperers. Both may serve. Have you been too silent? Is there an easy crime of silence? Is there any easy road to freedom? Well, it's getting late. And though I'll be with you a while yet longer, I believe this would be an excellent time for all of us to go outside in our minds and recall any of those steely black nights when we laid back on that soft grass and we gazed up into the expanse of those great rooms And not only this, but to remember those with whom we shared this experience, shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow. We have gone through great rooms together. And when upon the steely dark came the roads of a milky mist and a spray of stars, bunches and squares and spatters of stars. And we counted those stars one by one, 1,000,000 and 1,000,000. And we remembered those stars as fishermen remember fish, as bees remember blossoms, and as crops remember rains. And these were rooms too, we can so reckon. We can always say we have been through great rooms together. Well, I have had a magnificent opportunity here tonight. And whoever you are, and however it is that you came to be here tonight, I appreciate you. And we've spoken on the many different subjects of reading and writing poetry, but not yet on the subject of time, the granddaddy of them all. I'll say this: the gong of time. Time says, hush. By the gong of time, you live. Listen, and you will hear time saying, you were silent long before you came to life. And you'll be silent long after you leave it. So, why not be a little silent now? Hush yourself, noisy little man. Time hushes all. The gong of time rang for you to come out of a hush, and you were born. The gong of time will ring for you to return again to the same hush you came from. Winners and losers, the weak and the strong, those who say little and try to say it well, and those who prattle and babble their lives away. Time hushes all. When I was 79, I once told a reporter I would probably die propped up in bed trying to write a poem about America. And I often used to say, sing one song if I die. Sing John Brown's Body. Or shout all over God's heaven. Death comes once. Let it be easy. Stars, songs, faces. Gather the stars if you wish it so. Gather the songs and keep them. Gather the faces of women. Gather for keeping years and years. And then loosen your hands let go, say goodbye. Let the stars and the songs go. Let the faces and the years go. Loosen your hands and say goodbye. Well, that's my story. I always tried to live the way my own soul told me. I listened to what others had to say, both good and bad, about what I ought to do. And then I did as my own soul, my own heart, my own self told me. Poetry is the opening and closing of a door, leaving those who look through to guess at what was seen during a moment. Poetry is the capture of a picture or a song or a flare in a deliberate prism of words. It was on July 22nd, 1967, at our Connemara, North Carolina home, and at the age of 89, that my heart gave way to silence and sleep. And the last word I spoke was, Paula. And it was my Paula who said this at my memorial. He slowly breathed away. He had a beautiful passing. He now belongs to the world. Paula. And it was from that time until about 85 minutes ago, I have been in a hush. Thank you. Thank you.